All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Hersey Hoops' latest original podcast production, The Network, Episode 5, which features interviews with Hersey basketball alums across a variety of careers and majors. To highlight the connection between interscholastic athletics and career achievement, we hope the network can serve as a bridge between our alumni's experience in high school basketball with that of their professional successes. The network podcast is brought to you today by Club Z Tutoring Service, which features in-home and online tutoring services offered in over 400 locations and online. Club Z in-home tutoring services easier than you think and offers help ranging from pre-K through college level coursework. We guarantee you'll find the right fit or your first hour is free. Give them a call, 866-442-4582, or subscribe to their online newsletter. Tell them Hersey Basketball sent you. Last, subscribe to Hersey Hoops on Twitter or Instagram for live episodes of the network, which can also be found on YouTube, Spotify, or SoundCloud. What an honor and privilege it is to welcome our fifth guest live from LA today, Michael Fuerst, Hersey class of 2014 and graduate of Princeton University, where he studied mechanical and aerospace engineering. Michael now works as an integration engineer at SpaceX, who just recently launched their 8th Starlink mission, the Falcon 9, on June 3rd. Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Coach Scott. Happy to be here.
Okay, before we get into SpaceX and all the excitement and the questions that have come in from a variety of different angles, let's start with Hersey a little bit. Did you always know you were interested in aerospace engineering, or did you just head to Princeton with an interest in engineering and parlay that with your interest in space? And then how did your summer internship with Stanford and with NASA kind of sharpen the vision of what you wanted to do vocationally as an adult?
Yeah, good questions. I'll start with the kind of engineering in general. I always had an interest in making things, building things, and kind of solving problems. And so engineering kind of fit pretty well with that. Taking the idea of, you take all the findings from physics and other areas of science, and you're using that to strip it down. All right, what do I need to kind of figure out and solve this problem? So I've always been interested in that. And then, space exploration was something that I didn't grow up wanting to be an astronaut or anything like that, but I became much more interested in the idea of, how vast space is and how little we know about it. And, kind of wanting to be a part of that, helping build, explore, and like push out into, what hopefully be kind of the future of humanity and being able to leave a bit of a fingerprint on that. So that was where I kind of had that interest and where that came from. And then, when I was in high school, I had applied and was fortunate enough to be accepted into a summer program at Stanford, where I took 2 classes. I took a computer science class and a business entrepreneurship class. And it was a great experience to be able to get a feel for kind of the college workload, the smaller scale. But it was good, and to be away from home for a bit and kind of have that experience. And then, in college, the 2 summers after my sophomore and my junior year, I was able to do internships at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, out here in Pasadena. And I'd worked with a few different teams and did some work with the robotics there and the Mars entry, descent, and landing team. So that's actually for an upcoming launch for Mars 2020 for a rover, a large rover similar to Curiosity, which is a big rover on Mars right now. So I was able to work on the Sky Crane, which is this crazy contraption where they figured out the best way to land the rover, that's kind of the size of like a Mini Cooper on Mars, is to actually have it come down with this big crane that hovers using rockets and then lowers it down to the surface. So that's like one of the many things where, even though it's a crazy solution, it was actually the best one that we could come up with when the physics and pretty much the limitations all play out, that engineering finds that this is the thing that we're actually going to go put our money towards and build. So, that was a great experience, and it gave me another good dose of here's what's like working in the real world and facing some of these new challenges I wasn't able to get at school.
Sure. And then tell us a little bit about, at Princeton and reading kind of the information that you had available at LinkedIn about your undergraduate research thesis at Princeton, which had a little bit more to do with marine biology than space.
Yeah, absolutely. So my thesis, I worked with a partner on building like a robotic ROV, a remotely operated vehicle that would operate underwater and help with research of great white sharks. And that was through a marine biologist I'd met while out here one summer, and was looking for, hey, is there a way we can apply some of the things with engineering and robotics into that? And one, biology and nature and animals has actually been a different interest of mine for a long time, actually longer than space. But the other thing too was the idea that operating underwater is actually pretty similar to some of the constraints that you have building a spacecraft. The pressures that you have inside your vehicle are going to be different from outside. It's different in the water where it's higher pressure and you have all that water pushing in, trying to get in. Whereas in space, there's no pressure, and so it's all trying to push and get out. But you also have issues with communication and being able to send those signals, and how do you control the vehicle if you're removed from it and far away, and how do you figure out where the vehicle is and how it's operating. So I kind of saw it as an opportunity where it's much easier to build something and test it out in a pool than it is to try and get something up in orbit.
Right.
So it was a good testing ground for that. But yeah, that was a really cool project we were able to work on, and it did not end up being used operational by the aforementioned marine biologist. But it was cool to be able to start to build that up and have it operate and test it and keep running through the different loops of working with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. So quick trivia question before we get started. Can you name the other Princeton graduate who also played basketball for Hersey?
Oh, yeah. Brian Fabrizius.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, actually, it was really helpful. When I was getting recruited, I ended up playing Division I volleyball at Princeton. But I'd met with Brian, his dad, my dad, and us. We met actually right down the road at Sports Page, and had dinner together and kind of talked about what his experience was there as a student athlete and how he liked it as I was kind of making my decision of where I wanted to go. So it was great to be able to have someone to connect with and kind of talk through someone who already kind of been down that path and what he felt about it and how he liked it and how Hersey compared and how it prepared him.
Right. And then there's a current physics teacher at Hersey. I'm not sure if Mr. Johnson was there.
Yeah.
When you were in school, but there's a little nice Princeton network.
There is. Yeah, no, I had Mr. Johnson both for whatever I think it was junior year physics class, and then senior year I took AP physics with him. And yeah, it's funny. There was a friend of mine, Connor Simo. He did not play on the basketball team. He was actually on water polo and some other things. But we were both in that class together. We were in a lot of classes senior year together, since we both took AP physics, AP chemistry, which are I think both like 4 of the classes out of your full day, so it kind of locked our schedules together. But yeah, we're pretty close with Dr. Johnson. We always joked about kind of going to the same college or trying to do something like that, and he actually ended up at SpaceX this last year, so all the way out here. So it's funny how across that distance, like you said, that kind of little bubble and network, whether it's through Princeton where Dr. Johnson did some of his graduate studies and work, or now out here out in California where I'm hooking up with some Hersey alumni.
That's definitely one way to block your schedule with some of your friends, is being the advanced placement science courses.
Yeah.
Because those often sometimes run before school too, correct? Or like a double block period?
Yeah, they're double block. So I don't know, the schedule also may have changed since I was there, but yeah, it used to be double blocks. You'd go, back to back. And so, 4 of your classes are together, and then, anything else outside of that is kind of, so we had the, same gym class just because that was the only slot and then was available after that, same weights class and things like that. So yeah, I think like 7 over 8 classes during the day were together.
Awesome. So obviously, like, your admission to a school like Princeton speaks to your academic resume in high school. And then, you mentioned outside of just taking challenging coursework in those advanced placement science and math courses, you played basketball, you played volleyball. How did any other extracurricular involvement in clubs or activities at Hersey play a part in your success in college and then now your career at SpaceX?
Yeah, no, I think first off, the experience I had with varsity sports, both basketball and volleyball, played a pretty big role. One in representing to college, that I was able to juggle that schedule, and obviously being recruited as Division I athlete, that played a big role. But I think also the general challenges of balancing practice and games and lifting sessions on the weekend and all that kind of stuff demonstrated and helped learn lessons on time management and getting through adversity, and then also leadership and teamwork and all those kind of things that sports are able to give you, and that helped me a lot. And then on top of that, I also have worked with I took a class, I don't know if it's still offered there, Project Lead the Way. Is that still a course at Hersey?
Yeah, it's definitely in District 214 still. I don't know. Sometimes the building focus shifts a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, no, I had taken that, and that was a big part for me for engineering, to be able to get that hands-on experience, working in the shop, working design, doing some projects, and we did a few things. We built a high mileage car that we ended up taking up and testing and racing up in Wisconsin, and we did some building of robotics and other small programs, and that was a huge thing for me to have that hands-on experience and demonstrate that. And I wasn't able to. There were some groups and clubs. There was like a battle robots club and stuff that would have been cool, but that was actually a trait I had with the varsity sports I did. Things would happen after school, and I wasn't able to participate in that. But having that class then was super helpful in terms of being able to dive into that and then demonstrate. I was getting recruited or applying to schools. I'm interested in this, and I'm showing that I'm going to be able to take advantage of the resources that you as a school are going to offer me, and this is how I'm going to do it because I'm doing it here in high school. And so that was a big thing for me. And then I was also in student council and a few other groups, worked with the CLS program at Hersey. And so a lot of those experiences I had helped me teach or helped me learn a lot of lessons on different things about working with other people and working in difficult environments. And yeah, I think that whole it's funny, all the experiences that you have, it can be a mix of things, right? It doesn't have to be as direct as project lead the way is for engineering, but it can teach you a lot of lessons and help prepare me both for college and then today at work. Like it's lifelong lessons that are still serving me today.
Yeah, and I think, like, as you mentioned, just the collaborative environment and then the academic curiosity mixed with the intensity that sometimes comes with high-level varsity athletics, it rounds you out in a lot of different ways, which I don't think high schoolers often fully are cognizant of or aware of, but definitely they become that later in life. Okay, so transitioning a little bit, tell us a little bit about the work environment at SpaceX. Like, of course, as you mentioned, you're working collaboratively with some of the most brilliant minds in the world under one roof. And how does that cooperation and unique structure of the company put people in positions to succeed and fully utilize their creative talent of so many gifted people?
Yeah, it's definitely a unique place. It's an amazing place to work, and I've been able to work on some amazing hardware and with some amazing people. I think some of the biggest things that SpaceX does really well are we have a large emphasis on, we'll do weekly meetings with, anyone who's like your direct lead above you, weekly one-on-one meetings, and that's true for everyone in the company up to the highest level. And having that like really tight feedback loop of, hey, what are you struggling with? What are your blockers? What's going well? And we'll always be in touch, much tighter than that, multiple times a day, and kind of just constantly working together. But having that time set aside to talk about, what kind of things that the leadership team can help you with. And one thing we talk about is like delegating up. Instead of, typically in a lot of structures, it's like, okay, how do I, delegate tasks to people below me? But delegating up to like, here's a decision that is going to affect multiple things, or here's something that it's working across multiple teams, and you as my lead will be able to effectively manage that conversation better, or things like that. And so finding whatever the best thing is for the company as a whole, and taking kind of the mindset of everyone being, okay, if you were, the CEO or the head of the company, what decision would you make, or what would you want you to be working on the best thing for the company? And so that's really encouraged to empower people to be, making the right decisions. And the other thing is we have a lot of like ownership of what we build and what we work on, that is kind of unique. I think a lot of places are pretty, rigidly structured, and like you kind of get in the door and then you work on like a small half of a piece of something.
Right.
And then, but SpaceX, like you're kind of thrown into the water where it's like, all right, you're building this whole system, and, we're here to help, but you got to just, jump into it and start working on it, which is a great experience to be able to work on that so quickly and so soon, and kind of like learn those lessons. And, but that said, also the systems are built up really well to make sure everything that we send out of the factory is going to be built correctly and built properly and built safely. I think, the program I work on, the Dragon capsule, the Dragon vehicle, is actually, we just had a mission a few weeks ago taking astronauts up to the space station. It's the first time we've launched people. It's a big milestone for us. But that was like a very big responsibility to really seriously of, these two men, that, their fathers, they have families, and we need to make sure that they're going to get up there safely and get home safely. And so they're still up there at the space station right now, so the mission's not over, but so far things have gone well. And so even when we have that environment that's, very collaborative, very loose, very like you are pushing the edge and challenging yourself, and throwing people into situations where they're forced to grow and figure out more than they think they maybe are capable of. We still make sure that the overall framework is going to have the right checks and balances and oversight to make sure that the right product leaves the floor, and that we trust and that we'd get on that vehicle if we were going to go fly on it.
Awesome. So it sounds like, as you mentioned, like there's a tremendous sense of autonomy within the work environment at SpaceX. And I think that autonomy probably drives a lot of the motivation and the pride in their individual performance or development of systems or structures, like you mentioned, which I think is such a huge thing in school as well. So Elon Musk has mentioned kind of pretty explicitly that one of SpaceX's missions is to decrease the cost and improve the reliability of access to space by a factor of 10. So what types of things are being instituted to help make that possible? And then ultimately, I know this is like the most aspirational of aspirational questions. How far off is it in a time sense that space travel can become affordable, not necessarily to common people, but to more people than just astronauts, I guess I'd say?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So yeah, there's a joke for timelines about like Elon time, where it's like, you take whatever it is and you double it, or something like that. But yeah, so as for the timelines for people getting up there, we are actually right now booked for, again, not normal regular people, but for very wealthy people being able to buy seats and go up to the space station. I think actually it was announced that one of our future missions, I think Tom Cruise will be going up to the space station to film a movie. They're talking about right now, and so he would be on one of the capsules. And then there are also some very rich individuals who are able to buy seats. But our goal is to make that much more affordable. And ultimately, a big goal of SpaceX is to start colonizing Mars and expand humanity out beyond Earth. Which, again, speaking of it, aspirational goals, that's a pretty big one. But for one of the things we're working on right now is our Starship program, which we're doing a lot of like rapid development work down in Boca Chica, Texas, which is kind of like the southern tip of Texas where our production and our launch facility will be. And that vehicle, one thing we're working on is like point-to-point transfer on Earth. So pretty much, you get on a barge or ferry that goes out to the floating launch pad out in New York City, or in Lake Michigan out in the middle of Lake off Chicago. And the rocket's able to launch, and then you can land off the coast of like Tokyo or Japan, and then shuttle in and like you're point to point in 25 minutes because you go up, orbit around, come back down. And so that's something that they've talked about and they're working on. And so that's something that ideally it would be with the scale of the cost that we're trying to target, it would be kind of the cost of like a first class or like a higher class like airline ticket is the goal that they want to get it to, which is pretty crazy. I think there's a lot of regulatory hurdles and stuff that would have to go around for that to be true, but that is what we're trying to get down, more than just 10 times, but much, much cheaper, where the idea is with Starship in particular, you're going to be just paying for the price of fuel and as little refurbishment as possible. And that's kind of the goal of how we get there, is to really mimic the airline industry. And the way I think it's pretty good where Elon talks about it is, if you were traveling, say from, here to Australia or wherever, would you rather, fly in a small plane and then you get there and then you throw the plane out and then you build a new plane and then fly back? And then, because that's kind of how we used to work with rockets, where you just launch it once, you build, put hundreds of millions of dollars into this, launch it once and then throw it away and just kind of splashes down the ocean or goes up into orbit and sits there. Or would you try and, refuel it and fly it back? Which is exactly what we do with planes. Makes a ton of sense. And so that's what we're trying to do with spacecraft. And, there are difficulties with the environments they go through when launching and landing is a little more difficult of environment than a plane would go through. But that's the same idea. And we've demonstrated that with Falcon 9. The biggest obvious improvement that we have is that that's a rocket that can land, which today, people who aren't super know much about the space industry have probably still seen some images and videos of the rockets landing. It's funny, I've talked to people that are like, oh, don't all rockets do that? Just kind of like, I've seen that, it happens. But that was like a super novel idea less than 10 years ago. And a lot of people thought SpaceX as a company was going to fail because it wasn't possible or feasible or economical. And now we've made it pretty commonplace. And now we're able to reuse rockets. And so that investment that we put in a single rocket, now we're just putting it into refurbing it and refueling it, as opposed to building a whole new one. And so that's how we're able to drive our prices to be much lower. And again, they're still expensive. I think like a Falcon 9 rocket's still like $60 million, but it's comparing to 100 to 200 million of competitors. So you're working on scales that are pretty large, but as you cut that down more and more and more, and you get to a really big vehicle like the Starship vehicle, and you split it up a few hundred people, you're able to get those tickets down to ideally like $1,000 or a few $1,000s, which would be much more accessible to the average person.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of blissful ignorance when it comes to traveling in that way. Okay, so jumping off from that, in June 2015, the company asked the federal government for permission to begin testing for a project that aims to build a constellation of over 4,000 satellites capable of beaming the internet to the entire globe, including the remote regions of the world which currently don't have internet access. So how much of SpaceX's mission centers around outside ventures like this that are in essence making advanced technology and scientific discovery more of an ongoing journey for the world to become a better place rather than the destination? And you mentioned that a little bit with the expedited travel. And how are those creative goals kind of embedded into the company culture?
Yeah. That program is a really interesting one. So Starlink is pretty much this year. We're going to launch a bunch of satellites around the world, a few thousand, which is much bigger than the constellations of other programs. So for a little background, if you think about a satellite above the Earth, the higher you are, the more of the Earth you can see, right? If you go far enough back, you can pretty much see almost like half of the whole surface of the Earth. But if you're really close in, you're only going to see like a smaller chunk of it, even if you're up in space, right? You're going to see what's directly below you. And so that's what we're doing. We're much lower because the difference there is that if you're much closer, that latency or the time it takes for signal to go from Earth up to satellite and back is much lower. So previously, this is kind of where Falcon 9, we actually were to feed ourselves in terms of taking advantage of some of the technological advancements and economical gain there. So we're able to launch satellites for much cheaper than previously. So previously, you'd launch for, the launch itself was hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you'd say, okay, we're not going to buy a lot of launches. That's a lot of money for my, telecommunications company. And so I'm going to just do as few launches as possible. And the best way to do that is have like super advanced, like literally the size of a city bus size satellites that are going to launch. And we're going to launch a few of those. But then to get coverage of the Earth, we're going to have to be really high up and far away so we can see all the areas we want to cover. So they'd launch, anywhere from 10 or 6 to 20 something satellites, and that would be your current like offerings for satellite internet and satellite TV and communications. And that's why there's a pretty big reputation for them being kind of slow, unreliable, affected by cloud cover and things like that. So now we have the opportunity with the Falcon 9 to launch a ton of satellites for very low cost to us, because we've made that paradigm shift to have launch be actually a cheaper part in comparison. So we'll launch 60 satellites per Falcon 9. And we're going to have a few thousand. And since we have so many, we can be in a much lower orbit, which then allows us to get, much quicker feedback between the ground and up to the satellites and back. And so that's what's going to be a big game changer for the coverage that we're going to be able to get and give people in more remote areas, and kind of give another option for people around the world to have connection to the internet. And part of that is, that's a need that we think is underserved and will help the world as a whole. But a big part of it is it also honestly plays into our goals of trying to colonize Mars and the rest of the solar system. And the way that actually plays into it is that if you took kind of our mission to be, hey, we want to go build a base on Mars, or we want to go do something like that, you took that to like a boardroom of a typical company, and you said, all right, we need the money to go do this. And they're going to say, okay, how much does it cost? We're going to say a ton of money. And like, what's the risk? Really high risk. And what's the return? We're not sure exactly. Like, we think it's worth doing, but we can't, tell you exactly this where you're going to get laughed out and you're not going to get a penny. And so instead we know this is something we want to do, and we have to fund ourselves. And we have a lot of investors who are interested in some of these parts of our business model, the launch side that's pretty profitable, and the satellite side. But the satellite, the idea is, the launch industry is about 10 times, or maybe it's 100 times less as a whole than the telecom industry. So if we just get, a fraction of that, like a percentage, we're not looking to dominate the whole industry, but just get revenue from that. That can then fund our programs that, you wouldn't be able to be funding just with launching satellites alone. And so the idea is that will then be a really big moneymaker for our company to allow us to continue to fund like the other parts of our programs where we want to, continue to build the vehicles that are actually going to be able to make those longer trips out to other parts of the solar system. So that's kind of where that plays in. And there's definitely levels of, hey, what if we, the creative part of making the system, if this can work, and kind of we cycle through different ideas and different programs. This is one that's stuck that we think will really help the world and also help our company's goals, which again is going back to kind of like a higher level goal or aspiration for humanity.
Awesome. And then just going back to like kind of the rudimentary stages of math and its application to your job, what high school level math and science classes are the most directly applicable to somebody in aerospace engineering? Like, I would assume you were a pretty advanced STEM student during your time at Hersey, but also what teachers were able to deepen your problem solving skills. You mentioned like your creative building skills, and just to make those classes fun.
Yeah. There were a lot of teachers that I had in high school, then later in college too. I'd say so for level of math, I mean, honestly, day to day, there are certain levels that you just have in your, freshman year, like geometry classes, things like that don't necessarily even go up to like, calculus levels of understanding. I mean, day to day, I'm very rarely using direct applications of calculus myself or doing like those calculations, but I do have to have that understanding so that when I'm diving into tools or making a tool or something like that, or a program that is able to do that I understand how it's working, why it's working, and that the answer I'm getting kind of makes sense. And we also work with a lot of charts and graphs and equations that are using those same principles and those more advanced levels of mathematics. So it's important to know, but day to day, again, it's a lot of just some of the more basic understandings of how those relationships work out. And yeah, I had a number of teachers. I'm afraid I'm going to like miss someone in giving the list, but yeah, Mr. Johnson that we talked about before, for my physics classes, he was a big part of my STEM education, along with Mr. Cassidy, who, I don't do as much chemistry direct application in the work I do today, but just kind of a way of thinking about the world and how you can apply some of those things. And, he was a big inspiration and a really good teacher and lesson in that. And then even outside of, some of my STEM classes, Mr. Borgoff was a teacher I had for history. And again, just kind of the excitement you have at looking at the world in different areas and different challenges and approaching the lessons that you're able to learn from history and apply those. It's still applicable to like everything else that I do today in terms of, having that general excitement and being able to take those same, principles of how to critically read and analyze something and figure out, okay, what does this actually mean? It applies even to, more scientifically directed fields and even to more, just going through emails or documents or things like that and being like, hey, how am I figuring out like, okay, the perspective of this person that's writing it, what are they actually looking for? What are they interested in? And how do I make sure I'm giving them the response they actually want, even if it's not what they're saying? So those lessons were great. And then Project Lead the Way, Mr. Wiederzak, he's actually, I think, over at Rolling Meadows now and left shortly after I had graduated, but he was the teacher there who kind of led that class. And that was obviously a huge part of my engineering education in terms of getting an early exposure to that. And so yeah, like I said, I'm afraid I missed someone, but there were a lot of teachers and then coaches too, who helped me along the way and helped me develop to who I am and where I am right now in life.
Sure. All right. Now, all the hard questions are over. Last two questions just for fun. Game of Jeopardy featuring all Hersey basketball alumni. I have you as the odds-on favorite at 2-5. Do you bet on yourself or do you take the field here?
I'm going to take the field. I don't know all the alumni, but I'm sure, their trivia knowledge is probably better than mine. Or yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to take that on myself.
And then what would be your expert Jeopardy category? Like one that could run the gamut, 500 through 100 layups for you.
Yeah, I'd probably say my current field with space and space history and space exploration. I mean, that's probably what I have the most expertise in. I'd probably be able to bet on, but I don't know. There's sometimes people who aren't even in the field, but are just like fans of it, who would just be able to run circles around me too. So if there's a Hersey alumni out there who's a big fan and follower, they may be able to give a good run for the money on that one.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mike, for your willingness to be our fifth guest and taking the time out of your busy schedule, especially 7 a.m. LA time. Follow at Hersey Hoops on Twitter or Instagram for live episodes of the network, and follow the podcast on YouTube for the full visual experience, or Spotify or SoundCloud for the audio version. Not many basketball programs can say that they have an alumnus involved with SpaceX, and we're very proud of all that you're doing, Mike. So continue the hard work, and we'll be following tabs on you back home.
Thanks, Coach Scott. Appreciate it. Also want to give a shout out to Coach Freeman, one of the people I realized I've forgotten talking about. He was a big part of my development.
Absolutely. I'm sure Steve Free will love to hear it. So
really with the dilly, yo. When I be on the mic, yes, I do my duty, yo. While up in the club like we while in the studio. You know when to violate, baby, really and truly, yo. My main thug, villain ain't Julio, he moody, yo. Type of brother that'll slap you with the tulio. Real shook, scared to death, act fruity, yo. X that.